In a recent video, I was covering a story about my layoff earlier on in my career, and I want to continue that, right? In that video, I went through 5 signs of layoffs that could be coming up, which would be change of management, the company managing or mentioning restructuring, other job cuts in other departments, other locations, and all types of things like that, right? So there were 5 points there. The other point was around companies going through a merger. If your company goes through a merger, typically they've got more people than they need, and they're going to make job cuts in every department. Now, this job cut occurred when I was working at a senior level with the board of directors, implementing global frameworks, working as a form of manager globally, and it's quite a decent level senior management role, right? And I was managing like whole financial risk framework globally. And it's kind of interesting to me. I was managing teams in Malaysia, Brazil, India, and I was based in the UK at the time. And I didn't have the chance because I didn't stay there for too long after there were some job cuts. But the intention was that I'd have some opportunity to travel, to some of these locations, some of these low tax jurisdictions where we had offices, like countries like Panama and Cayman Islands. Slips my mind. I always confuse Cayman Islands with the Canary Islands. But anyway, so there's all these opportunities that I could have had, but it didn't work out in the end. And again, this is what we're going to learn from here, how you're going to get fired even though you didn't do anything wrong. So another point I want to make here is around reorganizing the department. If all of a sudden your manager decides to reorganize the department, it's probably because there could be some job cuts coming up, right? Or at least changes in management. So I realized that when they were asking me and my team what we were doing each day, what were our work tasks, how we fit in with the other teams, it sounded a bit suspicious to me. So what we started to notice, they wanted to restructure the whole department. They wanted to change how my team worked with all these different departments. And I saw this as a red flag, that what my team was doing was getting split up with other teams. So that's a red flag to look out for. If there's massive change in how the workflow works, where does your team fit in? If it looks like a red flag, then you should just look out for that in terms of maybe they want to push you or your team out of the company. And also where you are on the organizational chart. If you're going from being at an equal footing to other employees or other management, all of a sudden they move your team at a much lower level, or your role goes to a much lower level on the hierarchy of the organizational structure chart, then that could be another sign that maybe that you don't want you there. And it could be another sign that you should look out for a layoff and you should look out to leave the company. Now, if you're starting to see signs of a layoff, whether restructuring departments, all the other things I tend to mention here, you should really think about what your future is and what you want to do, right? So if you're starting to see these layoff signs and you feel like your role's shrinking, your social status or your work job title status is fading and management is quietly sidelining you, and you want a clear plan to protect your money and also to protect your self-respect and move into a stronger, higher paying role, this is how you can do it, right? By working with me through coaching. I help provide more power, pay, and freedom for my clients by planning ahead of layoffs, which seem to be very common now. Even if you're working a government role, you could be dealing with a layoff, or any type of safe role. No job is safe anymore. So going back to my story, reorganizing work tasks. This is something else they did. They started moving work tasks my team were doing to other teams, projects to other departments. Me and my team were less involved in future forward-looking type of initiatives. My manager was taking us off projects, discussions, email trails, keeping me out of discussions with plans to use more newer vendors to change some of our framework. And when I started to realize all of that, I was like, okay, well, maybe things aren't going well. I could sense it. I was a bit on edge, and normally you should trust your instincts. Even though I was working from home full time for this role at the time, I was like, oh, something's changing. They don't want us at the company, me and some of my other team members. So my team had very little to do apart from short-term admin tasks, like updating the intranet and explaining what our work tasks were for others. And this is when I kind of stood out to me. We're actually not doing any real meaningful work. We're just giving small tasks. You could be dealing with that. Maybe if you're working on a sales team and you think you might be coming up for a layoff, they start putting you on less sales calls. And instead, what they tend to do, they start asking you to manage the sales admin, work in the back office, right? And that's when they really want to get rid of you. Now, another point I want to mention is when they have no budget for replacement hires. I had a team member who ended up leaving, and she was working in Malaysia at the time in another office, and she ended up finding another role at another company. And we couldn't rehire her, but we had the same amount of work. And they were like, oh, we can't rehire right now. And it started to stand out to me because we had all this extra work that we needed a junior employee to do. I couldn't do because I was busy with other things. It was, what are they expecting here, right? They're firing junior employees who are relatively cheap to hire in developing countries like Malaysia, right, this is another red flag that more and more layoffs could be coming in. If they start firing junior people in low cost of living locations, they tend to be cutting any sort of expense, even more expensive qualified employees in the West. So it didn't make sense to me when we couldn't hire to replace people that we were losing, right? And this was before the mass layoffs came off. She decided to leave the company, so we couldn't hire for a replacement there. Next thing is, what's quite funny to me is the management at the time. And if you watch my first video about this, the manager that we had was relatively new. He was relatively junior. He went from managing a small country like Mauritius to being head of global management, which is a red flag, because typically if someone goes from a senior role very quickly, it's because the management like them and they don't know what they're doing, but management just want to have favoritism towards that person. So this guy is quite funny. He was leading a town hall, a department meeting, and management kept heckling him. Other people who were just below him were just constantly undermining him and saying, oh, you're not doing that properly, we need more of this, we need less of that, you're not sure about this, you don't understand that. And that kept happening. And what I ended up realizing, that the constant criticism he was receiving was from other managers who had their job threatened by him, basically, and he was going to push them out sooner or later. So he wanted to take as many cheap shots at him, which were kind of valid, and they were pointing out all his clear knowledge deficiencies and his inexperience, right? Other people who were up for a layoff coming up soon, they were retaliating in a passive aggressive way. So it's clear that this guy wasn't fit for the role. Many other people were losing their jobs, and I could tell because people were losing their patience, right? People pointing out his mistakes in front of everyone else. That was another sign that you could see that, oh, other people are looking to leave the company, or they might be pushed out the company. So maybe that's another thing you should look out for. How are other people reacting? If other people are losing their temper, complaining about pay, complaining about their power in the company, or they don't have as much say as they used to, it's just a general direction. The company culture is changing and people are looking to leave or going to be pushed out because they're having their role marginalized, which is it's covered before. It's a sign where you're like, oh, well, maybe they are pushing me out. They haven't told me about the layoff yet. And the last point is around managers lacking basic knowledge, right? So the manager lacked basic knowledge, right? Say you went from managing a small country like Mauritius to the world and the entire framework for the company globally. He didn't know the basics on crypto. He was just a lawyer who was kind of pushed into a management role. And I noticed when other team members would leave, he didn't know how to help and do their role. So for example, on our team, we had a manager who's roughly at my level who was on maternity leave. Now she explained certain tasks in a very messy way to me and others of how to cover her work. And it wasn't clear what to do. Then I asked the manager, who's this new guy, who head of department, he didn't know how it worked. So it's just like he's completely clueless. And companies heading in the wrong direction when they start putting really average people in senior management roles to save up money. They don't know what they're doing. People are kind of losing their patience. And this is what I mean. When it comes to all these points, reorganizing the department, reorganizing your work tasks, no budget for you to hire people who are leaving your company before the layoffs tend to kick off. Also, the manager being incompetent. These are all signs of companies heading in the wrong direction. They're just trying to make any cost cuttings and cost savings they can. And this is a sign you could be pushed out the company for a layoff, right? If your role is being minimized, or your status in the company, your value is being disrespected, you're being disengaged from team meetings or discarded, and your people are talking over you, you're just seen as a pointless piece of office furniture in the company, these are signs that you could be up for a layoff. And I've covered that throughout this brief video here. So if you found this interesting, let me know in the comments how you've picked up on signs a layoff might be coming up for you. There are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and a link in the description for career coaching so I can actually help you through these difficult scenarios.